The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus and his followers went as far as Capernaum, and as soon as the Sabbath came, Jesus went to the synagogue and began to teach. And his teaching made a deep impression on them, because, unlike the scribes, he taught them with authority. In their synagogue, just then, there was a man possessed by an unclean spirit, and it shouted, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus said sharply, "Be quiet, come out of him." And the unclean spirit threw the man into convulsions, and with a loud cry went out of him. The people were so astonished that they started asking each other what it all meant. "Here is a teaching that is new," they said, "and with authority behind it. He gives orders even to unclean spirits, and they obey him." And his reputation rapidly spread everywhere through all the surrounding Galilean countryside. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Before we start to break open the Gospel, I just want to pick up a little thought from the book of Deuteronomy, the first reading. You'll recall some weeks ago, basically, I think the second week of Ordinary Time, and we were listening to the Gospel of St. John, and Jesus had just appeared, and the leaders, the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees had sent some of their representatives to him in the River Jordan. And they asked him, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm not the Christ." And they said, "Well, are you Elijah?" "I'm not Elijah." "Are you the prophet?" "No, I'm not the prophet." The prophet is this prophet that Saint Moses, the Old Testament saint, was the one that he promised. So after Moses died at the age of 120 on Mount Nebo, the Israelites were expecting another prophet. But of course, many prophets came, but none of them were quite like Moses. So when they're hearing Jesus speak and beginning to do things, now they're wondering, could you be the prophet? So I just want to put that in the back of your mind so that when you hear that gospel next, you'll know that this is the prophet to which they are referring to. And of course, John the Baptist wasn't that prophet. But we turn to the gospel. So here's Jesus, and he goes into Capernaum, and Capernaum becomes like his hometown, basically, after he's rejected from Nazareth, his actual hometown. Capernaum is the place where Peter and Andrew came from. And he goes into the synagogue, as he usually did on the Sabbath day, and he begins to teach. Now, St. Mark very clearly points out his teaching made a deep impression on them, because he taught differently. So the question I know you're all wondering is, how did the scribes teach? Anyone curious to hear that? No one? Gosh, I hope a few of you. Good, because that's the answer. That's what St. Mark wants us to know. He assumed the first century Christians knew how the scribes taught. He didn't need it to explain it any further, but we certainly need an explanation. So this is how the scribes taught. When they're reading a passage from the Torah, so any of the 5 books of the Old Testament, the first 5 books, or maybe something from the prophets or the Psalms, they would be saying, about this verse, Gamaliel, who was a great teacher of the time, says such and such. And then they would say, Hillel, another great teacher of the time, says such and such. And they would just quote great teachers. And that's it. So people are kind of left to work out themselves, well, which one do you like? Which one do you agree with the most? Which one speaks most to you? Does that sound very conclusive to you? No one seems to know. No, exactly. It's not very conclusive. And in fact, sometimes when I was doing a lot of studies in Rome, I'm reading various scholars and I'm thinking, okay, this scholar says, and this so-and-so says such and so, and I'm thinking, yeah, but what do you say? What do you say? I feel like asking the question that Jesus asked, the apostles, who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? Not what other people are thinking about me. Who do you say I am? And so the scribes really never taught conclusively. That's why their teaching did not make a deep impression on the people. Whereas Jesus, how was he teaching? Say, you have heard how it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I say this to you. He speaks because he knows. And it's the only authority that he could assume is the authority of God himself, which he was. You have heard how, whatever, divorce is permitted. But I say this to you, was not like this from the beginning. If a man is angry with his brother, you will answer for it before the court and so forth. And if he calls him renegade, he'll answer for it in hellfire. So Jesus was very confident and comfortable in even going against the majority opinion. For instance, he also reinterprets the meaning of the Sabbath. The Sabbath is for man, not man for the Sabbath. And so Jesus does teach with authority, and that's why he doesn't just go on the opinion of others. If, of course, the opinion of others happened to be correct, then he agreed with it. For instance, in the great teaching, you shall love the Lord, the greatest commandment. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. That was already commonly accepted. So that's how Jesus taught with authority. Now, we move to the second part of the gospel. For the Hebrew mind, what was important in teaching was that there are signs that are accompanying it. For the Greek mind, even though the Gospels were written in Greek, don't let that throw you off. For the Greek mind, they were looking for wisdom. This was the big insight. Does your teaching contain wisdom? In other words, true knowledge that is objective, that lasts, that really, it remains even after you're dead and buried. So, and this is why St. Paul, in his first letter to the Corinthians, when he's talking about the mystery of the cross, he says, to the Jews, it's a stumbling block. They cannot get over. How could the cross be the means to our salvation? To the pagans, madness. Madness, because they're looking for wisdom. But to us who are on the way of salvation, it is the power and the wisdom of God. So, the Hebrew mind now has seen this teaching, made a deep impression on them. But they're secretly also looking for a sign, because it's signs that confirm the truthfulness of the teaching, or the authority behind the teaching. Well, it just so happens that there's a man who's possessed in the synagogue. And so we hear the story unfold. Unclean spirit shouted, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Even though, how many spirits were there in the person? Hello? How many? One. That's all the text tells us. One. But the demon is talking in the plural. What do you want with us? What do you have to do with us? So this demon is speaking on behalf of the other demons as well. What do you want with us? What is there? In fact, in the Greek it says, what is there between you and us? We have nothing to do with each other. We are on opposite sides. I know, though, who you are. Have you come to destroy us? The actual Greek says, have you come to perish us? Have you come to perish us? Because we know where we are destined. But we're going to expose you. And Jesus says, be quiet. Now, I'll just pause there for a minute. You need to know a bit of background. One of the biggest witnesses to Jesus' divinity, because the whole Gospels, there's a gradual unfolding of Jesus' identity, his true identity. He's not just a man, he's the God-man. but he wants people gradually to come to understand him in this way through faith, rather than through the dazzling miracles that he works. Because if God were just to reveal himself to us through some extraordinary signs and we come to believe in him, do you think we're really free? What do you think? No. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. We're not really free because we feel compelled. We feel compelled to believe. We're not, and Jesus is not interested in that kind of faith. He wants it to come freely from within. Because if we know he loves us, we know he will forgive us, we know he really cares. That's why he wants us to come to him through faith, not because we are overwhelmed. So, the demons, though, know this already about him. How did they know it? Well, before the human race, before there was ever any physical creation, remember in the Creed we say, who made all that is visible and invisible. There's a whole lot of invisible creation that God had made before he made the visible universe that we can observe. And this includes the angels. Now, the demons, were they always demons? Yes or no? No. What were they before? Angels. So they're fallen angels. Fallen angels. So God, though, wasn't going to give the angels heaven automatically without putting them to the test. I mean, after all, he puts us to the test. True? Absolutely. Many times he puts us to the test so our faith can grow. And this is why we, the first Sunday of Lent, which is not far away, it's always the temptation of Jesus that we hear. Because it is possible to experience temptation and to overcome it. But God tested the angels beforehand. And many of the church fathers believe, what was this test? Well, they believed that this test was that God gave the angels a vision of the future Christ. And that they would eventually have to adore him and serve him. And of course you've got Lucifer, who is the most perfect of the angels and the greatest natural talent, and all the other angels, purely spiritual creatures. And they're seeing this vision of what looked like a human being, and we have to adore him? Are you kidding, God? And what happens? There's a fight. Some choose him, say, yes, St. Michael says, we will serve. And the other angels, and Lucifer, I will not serve. And he manages also to convince quite a few others. We don't know how many, in fact, rejected God and failed that test. But we do get a little clue in the book of the Apocalypse, in chapter, I think it's chapter 12, that we're told that the dragon drags a third of the stars from heaven and brings them to the earth. And again, church fathers have interpreted this as being a symbol for the dragons, the devil, and a symbol for the fallen angels, sometimes called fallen stars. So anyway, but we'll leave that. The fact is, the demons then, when they see Jesus come on the earth, they're asking themselves, is this the guy that God showed us all those eons ago before there was ever any time? Could this be the guy? And the only way we'll know is by testing him and probing him. This is why Satan, when he's testing Jesus, when does he attack him in the wilderness? He's there for 40 days in total. Does he attack him early on? No. When does he attack? When he's his weakest. 40 days into it. Like a good general, you don't start a war at noon. You start a war just before dawn. Not that I had general training or anything, but the fact is, you want to go when your enemy is not expecting you. And Jesus is now, he's been fasting for 40 days. Now, he wasn't the first one to be fasting for that long. The devil had seen Moses, for example. Twice he'd gone up to Mount Sinai to get the 10 Commandments. 40 days and 40 nights, not eating or drinking. Ooh, this is a pretty unusual fellow. I've never seen anyone do that kind of fasting. But eventually, of course, Moses has been sustained incredibly by the grace of God. He's in a mystical state. We see a few hundred years later the prophet Elijah, and he walks in the food, that hot scone on the bake on the stones, and the jug of water he had to drink, and he walks to Horeb for 40 days and 40 nights. And Satan would have been thinking, But they knew also that both Moses and Elijah were weak, because Moses gave in to his own weakness before God in the wilderness when God had told him, just speak to the rock that it will yield water. And Moses doesn't just speak, he hits the rock. Because this was, every shepherd in the wilderness would have known these crystalline structures that look like rocks in the wilderness. And you smash them with your stone, with your rock, your staff rather, and water will come out. So Moses wanted to rely on his own natural knowledge instead of on the power of God. We see Elijah who loses his temper. So Satan knows these two human beings are sinful, but he's looking at Jesus. This guy is pretty darn perfect. Could he be the one? That's the background to what is going on. So they now have to think, well, we've got to kill this guy, which is of course what ends up happening. They think by killing him, they're going to win. Correct? Yeah, I mean, you think on a human level, but this is where the devil's pride blinds him. And when they kill Jesus, God says, tricked you, the resurrection is revealed. And Mel Gibson does this beautifully in his film, The Passion of the Christ, back in 2003 or 2004. And you see that figure as the devil screaming because he realizes what had happened. The deceiver has been deceived by God himself. And he's been, not because God lied, but because the devil in his pride didn't see it coming. So this is in the background of what is going on, the dialogue. What's there between us? You've come to destroy us. And Jesus says, be quiet, come out of him. You know what the actual Greek word means? Phimotheti means be muzzled. Just like you would muzzle an ox or a donkey or something like that. Muzzle it. So politely it's be quiet, impolitely it's shut up. Shut up, you know, Jesus says to them. And of course, if Jesus had no authority to command that of him, would the demon have obeyed? No. So this is now what the Jews are seeing in the synagogue. They're seeing, wow, we felt the authority, the impression of his teaching, but now we're seeing the sign. None of us could cast out this demon, but he had with just a word. So the criterion for authenticity, according to the Hebrew mind, has been fulfilled in Jesus. Now, how do we see Jesus' power in our own times? Because if we don't see Jesus' power in our own times, then somehow or other Christ has neglected the world, which would nullify his promise that, behold, I am with you until the end of time. Until the end of time. Jesus is indeed with us still, and his power is there to be seen. There are still exorcisms, by the way, and the church will do this only when she's convinced that there is no natural phenomenon to do this. And even the exorcist in the diocese, who is only known to the priests, he has to get permission from the bishop to exercise the full exorcism ritual. But this is not most of the ways in which God heals. The ways in which Christ heals is through the healing of memories, the healing of people's pains, the healing of people's wounded hearts, the inability to forgive, their pettiness. These are the ways in which Christ heals most of the time. And this is how he opens the eyes of the blind and the deafness or the ears of those who are deaf. In our own parish, we've seen some of this already taking place in Alpha. Alpha is the main way in which in our parish we evangelize. And this week and next, I want to speak a bit about Alpha, because the next Alpha course is fast approaching, with the Come and See night taking place on Tuesday, the 6th of February, 7 p.m. here in our hall. But what is Alpha about? And I know many of you have heard me speak about it already, but I want for those who haven't heard me speak to hear what it's about. Because Alpha is an invitation to, an introduction, you might say, to the Christian life. Basics of Christianity, 101 if you want to use university talk. And it's simply this: it's a meal, a simple meal, a movie, a short movie, and a chat. That's what it is. For 2 hours, and people come and people go. But what happens in Alpha? People have a meal together. And at a meal, what do people do? They sit down and chat, catch up with each other. Some talk more, some talk less. But people share. And as the weeks go by, they start to trust one another and enter into each other's lives. The videos themselves are very powerful. They're about general topics. Whether it's, an introductory topic like, is there more to life than this? I remember asking myself that same question when I was 17 years old. I studied my heart out for my HSC, did well, thought, big deal. Is there more to life than this? And that's when I started searching for what God really wanted of me in my life. Not my career, good as it would have been, but my vocation, my call. But there are lots of other videos. Who is Jesus? What's the Bible about? What's prayer? Does God still heal today? And then there's a chance for a chat. And this is what I really find such a gem in Alpha. That when people watch the videos, and I've seen them now multiple times, each one, and I still keep on learning new things because they're so well done. But different things are evoked within us, within the people in the group. And so there'll be different responses. And the good news is that in Alpha, you can say what you like, what you truly believe, and nobody is going to criticize you. There are two topics which in Australian culture we never talk about in public. What are they? Politics and religion. Why not? Is it because they're such bad things? No, but because they often are accompanied by deeply held convictions, and so likely to cause disagreement or even arguments. So, we want to have a peaceful interaction with someone, and we don't then talk about politics or religion. How sincere and genuine are our relationships? Then, it puts a real wet cloth on things, or a dampener, doesn't it? Because it means we can't say what we really feel and think. Whereas in Alpha, you can talk about those things, but we respect one another. We actually allow people. So, for instance, there's one video about Jesus. Who is Jesus? So to you and I, we're going to say something like, I believe Jesus is the Son of God, Jesus is my Saviour, Jesus is something like that. But to somebody who doesn't believe, they're going to say something like, well, Jesus was a great man, but I don't think he was really the Son of God, as some people say, as Christians say, and I certainly don't believe any of the miracles. Now, to you and I, that may not sit very comfortably, because we're thinking, wrong answer. Got the wrong answer on that one. Nobody will correct you. And that's not because there isn't a right or a wrong. It's because people need to feel free to speak what they really believe. Before I can enter into a discussion about right and wrong, I need to feel comfortable that I'm not going to be shot down. True? Yeah. I mean, if I think I'm going to be shot down, I'll close my mouth and I will not say anything. And then I might gossip behind that person, about the person behind their back, which is what often happens, right? So, in Alpha, there's a chance to speak freely and safely. And it's after And so, okay, the host will say, well, that's an interesting answer, thank you. And then someone else, would anyone else like to offer, how the video impacted you, whatever the question happens to be. And then they'll say something. And then someone else will say something. And then as the weeks go by, the Holy Spirit has an amazing way to enter into people's hearts. And confidence, the guards start to come down, and people actually start to communicate. And minds and hearts begin to meet. This is genuine communication. This is not a business arrangement. It's not a transaction that I have with someone over the counter, but the result that is actually the beginnings of a real relationship there. I remember one case where a group I was in, and there was a gentleman there, and I'll call him Bob, that's not his name. Anyway, I called him Bob, and Bob didn't say anything for I don't know how many weeks, I think it was about 6 weeks. And eventually, so we got used to him not speaking at the sharing. And then on week 6, Bob decides to speak. We thought, oh my goodness, we nearly fell off our chairs. But anyway, we thought, Bob wants to say something. He said, oh, I just want to say something. Around this table, every one of you is a believer. But I'm not a believer. I'm not even sure there is a God. And what I loved even more was that, not that Bob said that, I love that, but the response to his comment, his sharing. Someone said, thank you for saying that. Another person said, it must have cost you a lot to say that. It took a lot. Thank you. And then from that moment on, he felt welcomed into the group. He declared that he didn't hold the same beliefs as everyone else, but he was still welcome. And that's what Alpha is about. Because when there is a deep welcome, then the person feels comfortable enough to go the next step and ask, well, what is this faith of yours really all about? And then once I start exploring that faith, then I'll start exploring the behavior that goes with that faith. What makes you want to pray? What makes you want to go to church on Sunday? What makes you want to keep the 10 Commandments? What makes you not want to lie and whatever? Whereas typically in the church's history, not just the Catholic Church, but the Anglicans and so forth, we expect people to behave like us, and then to believe like us, and then you can belong to us. Behave, believe, and belong. The 3 B's. But in fact, that's not how human nature works. People need to feel that they belong first. Then they'll explore the belief. Then they'll explore the behavior. So the true way is in fact the inverse. It's belong, believe, behave. And Alpha allows this to take place. I'll finish there today. Next week I want to talk about how to invite someone to Alpha. I know some of you have already invited people to Alpha, as I have. But I want you to start praying, if you haven't already done so. If you haven't done an Alpha yourself, to consider doing it. It doesn't cost a thing. But also to consider who you could invite. Who the Lord is putting on your heart to invite. Because this could be a real life-changing experience, not only for you, but for them. And it's the way in our parish through which we evangelize, and this is how we will grow.